Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about how to become better writers. So these are kind of almost fundamental writing skills that you'll be able to use for improving your writing in this class. And ideally, also other professional and personal as well as academic writing you'll do throughout your scholastic career. So first, I wanted to define two terms that I'm going to be using in this lecture. So we're going to be talking about the difference between macro versus micro. And we're going to be talking about these terms in terms of talking about these ideas in terms of structure. So micro means small, right? If we're talking about structure on a micro level, right, we're thinking about the structure, I'm referring to like the structure of a sentence or a clause or a phrase, right? Whereas if I talk about structure on a macro level, I'm talking about maybe structure in terms of an entire paragraph or in terms of the essay at large. And improving and understanding structure in terms of how to organize your sentences and also how to organize entire paragraphs and entire essays. These ideas are really, I think, fundamental to improving your writing skills, right? Producing work that is more professional. All right, so let's talk about some qualities of good writing. I think one quality of good writing that's important is you are going to want to have sentences of variety. And what does sentence of a variety mean? I mean that sentences are not all constructed, let's say, for instance, with the subject arriving at the beginning, right? You want them to be, your sentences to be organized in different ways, right? And by that, for example, think about a sentence that one sentence starts with a subject, right? It's a very short and simple sentence, just a clause, right? I am Sam. And then the next sentence has several clauses, right? And it starts with a verb. And so do you see how I'm kind of, and it's long, maybe there's a semicolon, right? So there's some variety in terms of the pacing of the sentences, in terms of the syntax, the way the sentences are constructed. Everything does not look the same and uniform, right? Unless you're intentionally trying to do that in terms of some kind of intended effect. Another quality of good writing, I think, is that good writing is clear. And this is a surprisingly difficult thing to do, especially if you're new to writing or not as confident with your writing skills. I think writing for clarity, on one hand, you need to have a good idea of kind of like the technical ability. You have to be able to avoid comma splices, right? So reader doesn't read a sentence wrong. But you also have to have a good understanding with craft. And becoming a writer who writes clearly is something that took me personally a long time and is, I think, deceptively hard. But I think the main way to achieve clarity through writing is to just by practice, right? To do it, every day and to be thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it. And I think with time, you learn avoid certain mistakes that in the past you have made, and your writing becomes more clear. So another thing I think that's important is to be careful, right, in terms of your word choices and sentence structure. So, I mentioned a comma splice earlier, which I think is a common problem in undergraduate writing. Another common problem in undergraduate writing, I would say, would be using the wrong word. So, and by that I mean using a word to which we do not completely know its definition, or we're not entirely sure of the full definition, and using it in a wrong way. And again, with time, your vocabulary expands, and these things do get better with practice. But I think these are just using the right word is something to just be aware of. And sentence structure is something also to be careful and to think about when you're writing. One thing that me as I've been writing more and over more time is how careful I've become in the process. It's almost every decision I make impacts the entire whole, right? So it's something that is a very immersive process, the act of writing, I think. Another I think thing that might be important for us to think about in terms of good writing would be writing for concision. And I think writing for concision is important for the type of language you might be expected to use in your personal life or your professional academic career. So writing for concision, how can I say as much as possible in as few words as possible? How can I try to suggest as much as I can in as little amount of sentences? And, I think this idea of expanding and contracting on ideas is good practice and good things to think about as you are producing work for this class. I think the bottom line about good writing is it's often simpler than we think. And I think, it's just good writing. You are communicating what you're trying to communicate. It's grammatically correct. It's carefully constructed. And there's a variety of your sentences. So I thought we'd look at example of good writing from a reading that we've done this semester called The Uninhabitable Earth. So it is, I'm just going to read from it here. It is, I promise, worse than you think. If your anxiety about global warming is dominated by fears of sea level rise, you are barely scratching the surface of what terrors are possible, even within the lifetime of a teenager today. And yet the swelling seas and cities they will drown have so dominated the picture of global warming and so overwhelmed our capacity for climate panic that they have occluded our perception of other threats, made many much closer at hand. Okay, so in terms of looking at how these sentences exemplify variety, right? We see the first sentence starts off and there's kind of it is, and then there's a comma, and then there's an amending clause, right? And then it's a pretty short sentence. Then the next sentence, right, is a series of, it's kind of sentence called hypotaxis, so it's a series of clauses that run up on each other, right? And then the third sentence we have, and yet the swelling seas, and then there's a dash, and the cities they will drown, and then there's another dash, and the sentence continues. So we see these sentences are kind of being constructed and almost interrupted in different ways, right? We start off with a short sentence, and then the next two sentences are long and have several clauses inside them. So you see there is a variety in terms of how they are constructed. In terms of clarity, we can say yes, these sentences are clear. We understand what they are trying to communicate. And of course, this is, a published author who writes professionally. For him, it's probably, he's had his time to have his unclear writing. He's developed his writing more clearly as time goes on. We don't really see here him writing necessarily for concision, although he does give us a lot of images and a certain mood within a relatively short period of time. And we see definitely the way that his sentences are constructed. We see that he is probably thinking a lot while he's writing. He's writing very carefully, right? He kind of draws us in with this first sentence, and then he gives us kind of some context and a broad picture of what he's talking about. So these are all things that we might think about in terms of our own writing as well. Okay, so how I imagine my sentences. I found it easier throughout time to imagine my sentences like a road or a street, and you think of it as kind of trying to head in one direction. And I think this is useful in trying to avoid run-on sentences, which is another really common problem in early writing or academic writing. I know it is certainly one that I have made so many times, where I will try to cram too many ideas into a single sentence, right? So don't try to have your sentences head in too many directions at the same time. Try to, limit to kind of a single direction. And if you elaborate a little bit, that's fine every now and then, but I think it's something to keep in mind because it's something that I notice on almost every undergraduate paper, or at least the first paper of the semester that I read. So I got this idea of sentences as kind of an architecture from a writer called Renee Gladman, who's kind of an experimental writer and a poet. And I took a quote from one of her essays on writing, and she says, "I used to talk about the sentence as a city, a space to move through where you encounter punctuation like derailments or signs." So she's kind of imagining the sentence as an architectural space and punctuations as a sign to either stop or head into another direction. Okay, so being a good writer means being a good reader, right? Paying attention to what we read and stealing and borrowing ideas from that. Being patient with yourself, right? Taking time to produce drafts and acknowledging, or recognizing flaws in your writing and working to improve them. Being a good writer means paying attention to details in the language, right? Because every little detail, every little thing that we craft in ends up being important for the whole, right? Making mistakes and learning how to correct them, right? So I think if you try to work on one skill in your writing in this class, it's maybe just to write a good, solid sentence. And if you figure out how to craft a solid sentence, you'll be amazed at how the essay as a whole improves, right? Which is to speak the fact that writing is made up of a lot of little choices that you make, and those little choices really constitute the entire whole. Another thing that's important is learning how to navigate transitions in your writing, right? How do we lead from one idea to the next in a way that feels logical? How do we learn to organize our ideas so they kind of naturally lead from one to the next? And some of this is an organizational process, and some of this is a craft process. So learning, transitional words and learning how to navigate transitions in a way that does not feel awkward. Being a good writer means finding your own voice and personal style, and also adapting that voice and style to the kind of situation or the circumstance in which you're writing, right? Because you will not want to write to your mom or to your friends in the same way that you would write to a professor or a colleague, right? You're going to want to use a different style in those different circumstances. And you're going to want to learn to adapt appropriate levels of formality depending on to your writing or to speaking. And I think being a good writer also means having a solid writing process, including regular revisions and taking time between drafts to kind of examine your work with a fresh eye. You'd be amazed at all the problems that you'll find. All right, things to think about when you're writing. Copying or borrowing ideas or structure or words or tones from other writing you've encountered, right? So think of sentences that we looked from the uninhabitable earth earlier. Maybe there was a sentence there that was constructed in a way that you find interesting, and you might want to take that and use that in one of your essays. I think something to think about your writing too is how many ideas am I trying to cram in one sentence? Is this a run-on sentence? Maybe I want to take these ideas and put them into 2 or 3 sentences. How can I give my writing more personality? How can I be more careful about how I'm constructing these sentences? How can I improve this sentence, the next sentence, the next sentence? I think improving writing, for academic work is really thinking about on the level of the sentence. Another thing to think about, under what terms does your pre-writing process occur, and how can you adapt your writing process? And writing process is something that we are going to talk about at another point in the semester, but this is just kind of a little teaser to get you thinking about your own writing process. All right, common writing mistakes. So lack of specific evidence to support claim, right? Whenever you make a claim, you're always going to want to back it up with some type of evidence. Otherwise, your statements or claims will just kind of be abstract floating. I often see misused commas or lack of a comma. A comma splice is something that we definitely want to avoid. Mistakes in comma splice is something we want to avoid. Unclear writing, right? And sometimes this is easy to identify if you write a draft and wait a few days and reread it again, or have some outside support, have someone else read it for you. Words used incorrectly, cliches, unorganized writing on a macro level. So, the essay as a whole does not flow easily from one idea to the next. It feels kind of like jolted and incoherent and not cogent. Topic sentences that do not give direction to the paragraph, right? Your topic sentences should kind of serve as an introduction and should very clearly kind of give us an idea or state the purpose of the paragraph as a whole. And if they do not do that, I think in some way they are not functioning as they should, at least when academic writing. And then we just have, messy writing that's not careful. Maybe we have a circumstance of awkward syntax, typos, and misspellings. I think attention to detail is something that you kind of learn often as a college or high school student, and something that you improve throughout time, is learning how to catch those little errors, which can really contribute to the general sense of professionalism of the entire piece. Okay, so a final note. So today I've kind of given you some starting points from a practice that should become highly individualized. These are kind of things that I've kind of learned as I've been writing and teaching writing, but I really encourage you to make your own rules and to discover and elaborate on your own style and voice, and to make the process and your writing your own. All right, thank you very much.